It's been a warm and sunny week here, and most of the time I've been outside. There's been a lot of work in the area in front of the house, but I've also squeezed in one of my favourite walks in the area. This is what I've been up to. This week I've had some tidying up to do from last week and some preparations for some much bigger work next week, both of which involve the area in front of the house. On this side I've had to carefully remove all of the old patio structures so that I can reuse as many of the old stones and tiles as possible, while on this side I've had to move a few rocks around so that I can make some more space and so that I can organise the rocks into shapes and sizes so they'll be easier to pick out when I want to use them in the future. Billy was with me for one day at the start of the week, and my first bit of work was to move some drains and planks off the patio area. After all the work I did previously to uncover this old patio area, I am a bit sad about taking it apart. But the unevenness of the surface and the number of broken stones and tiles means that keeping it isn't really an option. But I am going to do my best to lift out all the material carefully and to recycle it for reuse in the future. The reason that I'm doing this work now is that I'm due to get some help next week shifting some earth around this patio area. And as part of this work, I want to scrape out any soil that might be beneath these stones and tiles. I will talk about the design for this whole area next week when the work is happening, but one of the main objectives will be to have an even surface at the same level as the ground floor of the house. As you can see, to start with, I was lifting out some stones that had functioned as a path edge and step, and they were a bit bigger than I had anticipated. And once they were out, it was time for a drinks break and a chicken stick for Billy. Then I was back to work and lifting out the first paver stones and checking what was underneath them. Before moving on to the remains of a bit of wall, the position of which and function I've never really worked out. Although more recently it appears to have been the home of this toad. When I told Billy what he had missed, he looked quite keen to find one for himself. The tiles in this section were a bit of a mix, with quite a lot of them cracked or already very broken up. I'm trying to keep all of it, apart from the really small broken pieces, and thankfully most of it came out quite cleanly. Once I had lifted the tiles, I wanted to check what was beneath them in case there was another layer of paver stones. But it looked like it was just a thin layer of soil on top of the bedrock below. After lunch, I moved on to a very different task inside, which was to work out how much more material I'm going to need to remove from all of the ground floor rooms. So I worked my way around the rooms with the laser level and made some rough measurements. With it being Billy's only day on site, I thought it would be nice to give him a bit of a walk outside, especially as there was a bit of cloud around. So we set off for a walk down the track. But with the sun coming back out and Billy already wanting to stay in the shade, it didn't seem like such a good idea. So we cut it short and headed back for the cooler temperatures in the house. While Billy went for a siesta, I did some checks that will influence how I organize the rocks and stones that I have excavated and put outside. I've obviously looked at these walls hundreds of times, but I've never really checked the exact size and shapes of the stones in different parts of the walls. And I wanted a rough idea of just how many stones of what size I might need for repair work in each area. In particular, how many bigger stones would be needed to align with existing patterns. The final bit of work for the day was to clear and mark one of the areas that is due to be cleared down next week. There are a couple of reasons for digging out this area now. First, some of the future designs in planting will take a longer time to get established. And second, leveling this area should make it easier to work on the front of the house in the coming weeks. The next day I moved on to the task of tidying up the stones I had dumped outside last week. As I said earlier, this was both to make more space and to organize the rocks. The area I was marking out will also be leveled next week, and its shape relates to the future design of this space. I was trying to keep the rock moving to a minimum, and the plan I was working to was for the big rocks at one end and the smaller ones at the other end. After lunch, I was back onto the patio area. First of all, moving the tiles to my general tile storage area. And then removing these red tiles, which were already very broken up. And then removing another stump of wall, which was attached to the edge of the walls of the old well, which I won't be removing at this stage. And then I was back to removing paver stones, some of which were thicker and heavier than I expected. But I was able to lift out nearly all of these without too much damage, and I added the majority of them to my ever-growing pile of thinner slate-type stones at the side of the house. The next morning, I was lifting out stones at the edge of the patio, which I think had been laid down as steps. Some of the stones were bigger and deeper than I had expected, and I was curious whether there was any other layers beneath them. After some digging beneath the stones, it doesn't look like there was anything below apart from soil on top of the bedrock. And after shifting the stones to the recycling zone, my trusty old wheelbarrow needed some of its bolts tightening. I then moved across the patio to remove the wall in front of the doors that had been a bit of a mystery. In taking it down, I discovered that it wasn't very integrated with either of the main walls, so I'm pretty sure it was a later addition. And the stones had been held together by a clay-type material, which was the same as some of the walls in the extension part of the house, rather than the lime mortar for the main part of the house. So I think this wall was probably added about the time of the extension. And when it was built, they seemed to have added a few things that needed to be thrown away. The next morning, I worked on some very rudimentary markings to help provide guidance for digging levels next week. Next, I was working on taking down this wall. I could have left this to next week and the excavator, but the stones looked in good condition, and I thought it would be easier to reuse them if I took them out now by hand. What I didn't consider was a big nest of giant ants. So I started to use the pickaxe more and move temporarily onto the next section. Having taken down what I wanted to at this stage, I took a break for lunch in the shade. During which my eye was caught by a purple hairstreak butterfly. These are quite common in the woods around, but I've not seen them in the garden before. After tidying up my morning's work, I decided a walk was a good option for the rest of the afternoon, both to protect my sore elbows from overwork and also to find out what other butterflies might now be out and about. I decided to do one of my favorite local walks, which involves a big loop that starts with heading down the track. It then takes a path down a side ridge that drops into the valley below, before walking up the valley bottom back towards the house. This big machine was being used by a forester to clear some land, and I thought it was better to film it once it had passed rather than stand in its way. There was one butterfly in particular that I was hoping to see and capture on film, which is the beautiful two-tailed pasha. And as I turned the next corner, I found one on the track probing some dung for some nutrients. I then headed further along the track, starting my drop towards the valley bottom, stopping at a couple of points to look back at the house, or at least the church tower that is much more visible. The track gets progressively steeper towards the bottom. The vegetation becomes more lush, and the temperature is much cooler. The path along the valley bottom intertwines with a small stream that's drying up as summer approaches. At this point on the track, there is a long wall that used to be in front of a house that is now in ruin and almost completely covered by the undergrowth and forest. Further along the path, the stream is slightly wider, and although it is dry today, about 3 weeks ago a neighbour sent me a video from near this spot after a very big storm. At various points along the stream, you can find small pools of water throughout the year, like this one here. At other points, you can see just how much the stream is still eroding into the side of the hill. There are a lot more plants and flowers down here, and it's a haven for many butterflies, like this painted lady. I was looking carefully for other butterflies, but sometimes only able to capture them on film very briefly, like this white admiral. And I got a big shock when this pasha thudded into my head, probably to check out the delicious sweat on my well-worn cap. It was now time to start heading back uphill and out of the valley, crossing through an area of eucalyptus trees that I believe were planted over 100 years ago with the aim of producing paper. On the way up, I saw this bright and blushing Cleopatra butterfly. And at the top, it was time for a quick drink before arriving back at the church and the house. On the last day of the week, I wanted to clear some undergrowth in a small area above the road. I started this work a bit later than planned, after a visit from a neighbour and an unexpected arrival that might feature in next week's video. The cyclist going past, the space I'm opening up, and the shade that it has all provide a bit of a clue as to why I'm doing this work. Then I was back to the house for some lunch, with a quick look at this swallowtail butterfly on the way. After lunch, I was clearing a bit more wall that was touching the other side of the old well structure. By making this gap, I'm hoping that next week the excavator machine can clear the remaining wall to the left without knocking too much down the well. And that is my last bit of work for the week, most of which has changed the way this area in front of the house looks. And next week, I hope that some parts, especially over there, are going to look even more different, so long as the helpers and the machines arrive when they're expected. Something that I've not always been sure about recently. So tune in next week to see if things go to plan.